Hey folks, David Stewart here. I can't believe that I'm about to do this, but I'm going to analyze for you Sherlock Gnomes. That's the movie I saw today. Not any of the movies you actually want me to see, not any of the movies that I would care about seeing, like Ready Player One, but Sherlock Gnomes. Why? Well, let's just say spring break, lots of kids, and I didn't have a whole lot of choice. That being said, I didn't have any negative emotions going into the movie because I had never heard of it. I had nothing, I had no expectations going into it, but it turned out to be quite bad. In fact, this movie sucks. This movie sucks so profoundly, it's actually mind-boggling. Right from its core concept, it's terrible. And what's even more mind-boggling is that this is actually a sequel to another gnome movie called Romeo and Juliet. Why does this movie suck? I'm going to give you the basics before I break down all the categories. Let's just say it's much less than the sum of its parts. Its core concept is, let's take Toy Story, which is itself kind of a ripoff of Brave Little Toaster. Let's take Brave Little Toaster, but garden gnomes, right? When the people come around, the garden gnomes got to freeze. And the garden gnomes tend the garden, and they care about making the... Who thought this was a good idea, or that this would be funny or interesting, is garden gnomes. Toy Story for garden gnomes. So there's the core concept, which itself is going to be like, well, that doesn't sound very interesting compared to toys that are alive, right? And that itself creates all kinds of other problems with the execution of the movie. And then you're going to combine it with a story that's based on Sherlock Holmes, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, a 19th century detective novel, and you're going to make it super reference heavy, drawing on Sherlock Holmes very intensely, and you're going to make it a kids movie. The kids I saw it with, they know that Sherlock Holmes is a thing and he was a detective, but they didn't catch any of the Sherlock Holmes references. So you're going to combine those two things together. Not a good combination, and it's made much worse by the overall format of the movie, which is this modern, hyper, almost epilepsy-inducing kids movie where there's so much stuff going on and the pacing is so breakneck, and they're just trying to cram as much slapstick into it as possible, that doesn't go well with detective movie. If you have a detective movie where you're trying to uncover clues and figure out a mystery, that doesn't really go well with like a hyper-paced, schizophrenic modern child's movie. So those three things combined, you should know that this movie is going to be really bad. Right from its beginning, the core concepts are not going to hold up. And I don't know who thought, let's mix Great Mouse Detective with Toy Story, but it doesn't work, and it's really bad. Beyond that, the plot is nonsensical. There's really not a plot. It's a bunch of different set pieces connected by these cards that it's not even like a detective mystery. It's a scavenger hunt. So there'll be a card that will just direct them into the next set piece that they're going to go to. Everything's kind of loosely connected, and things just sort of leap forward and happen without reason. It's Blake Snyder Save the Cat beats with just random whatever set pieces they wanted to throw into a movie, and kind of tied it all together by saying, well, there's a clue that leads them to the next spawn. It's really quite bad. The tension between the characters is completely manufactured and cringy, and it's all topped off with some of the worst sound that I've ever heard. So with that, let me break it down. Start with production. Aesthetics, 3 out of 10. I know that that's a low score. It's like, how could you score below 5, below like right in the middle on aesthetics? And the answer is, you make ugly looking gnomes that look stupid, right? And that's how it is. Now, part of the problem with the aesthetics is you start with garden gnomes, which aren't particularly interesting looking, and you put it in a very boring world. Our world is of mundane objects isn't particularly interesting to look at, compared to something like Coco, which has an immense ability to produce detail and color and beautiful art. This is really, really drab. And by themselves, the garden gnomes are kind of a mixture of ideas for aesthetics. Some of the garden gnomes look like garden gnomes, some don't, but they get up and move like normal people, so the fact that they're garden gnomes doesn't end up having any impact on it. It's just small people running around in a big world trying to avoid bigger people that never really show up except when you need to like put in a little extra tension into a particular moment. That's pretty much it. The aesthetics are really boring and drab, and because of the conflict between this idea of gnomes and then how they end up being sort of moved across the screen for you, it ends up coming off rather ugly. I thought it was a rather ugly movie to look at. That being said, next category, animation and special effects. I actually give this a 6 out of 10, which is a little bit, 7 out of 10's average for me, so 6 out of 10's a little bit below. It's fluid, but because of the way the aesthetics are set up, it goes against the aesthetics. It hurts the aesthetics rather than helps them. Compare this to something like the Lego Movie, which has that sort of jittery animation, but it's toy Legos, right? And it kind of supports the aesthetics. So your animation can enhance the aesthetics, like with the Lego movies, or it can detract from your aesthetics. And in this case, it actually detracts from the aesthetics and kind of lowers that score. Those are kind of connected. Or you can combine that, or you could just compare it to Toy Story. The motion and movement of the figures in Toy Story is limited by the fact that they're toys and they only have certain like articulation possibilities. You would think that with a porcelain garden gnome, obviously there's no articulation points, but when the people aren't looking, the garden gnomes just get up and walk around. And so that actually kind of hurts the aesthetics. Now, music and sound. This is actually one of the worst soundtracks I've ever heard. If you saw the movie Trolls and thought that was annoying, just this one's worse in my opinion. It's really hard to say that something could be worse than like a movie like Trolls, which is really unwatchable to me. But I give it a 2 out of 10 for the music and sound. It's completely schizophrenic. It starts off with these house beats. There's modern pop, and then there's also this incredibly cringy, completely out of place musical number. The only one in the entire movie performed by a doll in a doll museum that they go to, again, for no reason, I guess just so that they could have this this African-American doll sing a song. The song's incredibly cringy. The entire scene just makes you feel like, there's like really dusty chalk going across a chalkboard, or like your fingernails just kind of slipping down, really dry hands across dusty slate. That's what it's like, but on your ears. That's what the whole scene feels like. It's so cringy. When there's not a classic rock song, in fact they even ruin the classic rock songs. Like they picked the worst moments of, they have a Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting. Like if you can take Elton John and make me hate the sound of his voice, you've done something wrong, because I rather like Elton John, believe it or not. So when I hear Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting, it sounds like a detuned version of the Flotsam and Jetsam cover of Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting, because of the way that they present it. When you don't have these modern pop songs and this awful house music, you get just modern dissonant score. It's completely forgettable. It doesn't work. It's one of the worst soundtracks I've ever seen in a movie, and that includes a kids movie, and it's designed to just stimulate kids. This is like the worst kind of cinema to show to children. It doesn't have any kind of redeemable story. It's just stimulation, and the music really reflects that. It's something annoying in its own right, but it also enhances the overall annoyingness of the picture. Next, let's move on to story. Overall story score is 3 out of 10. Overall production score is 3.66 out of 10. First part is setting, so I did have a setting category for this one because it has the setup of Gnomes Can't Move. I give this 2 out of 10. Core concept of the movie is awful, and that's really what the setting is. It takes place in London. There's garden gnomes. There's a detective garden gnome. For some reason, there's a good detective garden gnome. The setup of having gnomes doing all the gardening for people seems really bizarre, considering you would think that they would notice the gnomes moving around, or that their garden magically ends up with flowers that they didn't plant, right? Unlike toys that you could imagine, like, maybe that toy moved because I don't remember putting him there. We don't have that with garden gnomes. If a garden gnome moved out of where you put him, you'd be like, someone came in and moved all my garden gnomes around. What kind of neighborhood did we move into? I thought we were moving into a nice neighborhood. It's really bizarre. At the same time, they also have this Moriarty character that's like a plastic figure from the top of a delivery van. And it's, at the same time, that entire setup with this detective and this really weird looking Moriarty is bizarre and out of place and feels strange, and is so reference heavy on something from the 19th century. I don't know why they'd put it in a kids movie. They also take half that time away to develop these characters from, I guess, the previous movie, Romeo and Juliet, which was completely forced. and all of them are pretty intolerable. So you don't even get the development of the main story because you got to cut half of it and show these characters from a previous movie. Which brings me to the character score, 4 out of 10. The only reason the character score isn't like 2 out of 10, because they're pretty much all annoying, is because there's actually really good actors. Like the voice acting in the film's good. I think they hired good voice actors, but the characters themselves are just simply awful. You have this postmodern deconstruction of Sherlock Holmes. Rather than Sherlock Holmes being an eccentric genius, slightly an egoist, kind of off-put by his friend Watson, and though they have conflict with one another, they have respect for one another. Instead, you get this self-destructive, delusional, disrespectful, and ultimately incompetent version of Sherlock Holmes. It's a destruction of the idea of Sherlock Holmes. And Watson, Dr. Watson, is also turned from a gentleman into basically an incompetent, a bad guy and an incompetent bad guy. So you take the heroes and in typical postmodern fashion, you just invert them, or you just destroy their meaning so that they're incompetent, worthless, and all of their possible flaws are just their main character traits, which makes them bad characters, right? So you don't have Sherlock Holmes as a flawed, eccentric genius. You just have Sherlock Holmes as an incompetent, flawed fraud, and that's kind of what you get with this. Moriarty is also kind of a postmodern self-reflection of his own role in the movie. He's constantly commenting about how stupid the things he's doing are. He's like, it only shows how evil I am, how stupid this plot is. That kind of self-referential humor is one of the only points of humor in the entire movie. The movie is really quite missing of humor, that they're throwing jokes at you left and right. The rest of the characters end up coming off as foils, except for Romeo and Juliet, which have this really forced. Of course, they were. You have to do this in a sequel. You take a couple characters that got together in one movie, and you have to make them have conflict in the second movie. So they just invent conflict. They get angry at each other for no reason, and that's what happens. They have a pointless falling out. It's a distraction on screen. It's annoying. It's not funny. It doesn't do anything. The kids didn't seem to like it either, and it distracts from the development of what could have been a funny, self-referential, Sherlock Holmes spoof. It ends up just being cardboard cutout characters kind of flailing their arms melodramatically. Plot, 3 out of 10. And the only reason it's a 3 out of 10 is that there are things in it. And within the first 5 minutes, you're going to guess the entire plot because they have one of these things. How do we know this guy's the villain? I got one of those, he's the villain. And you know who the real villain is. And then, of course, it's like, we killed the bad guy, but you don't see his body. So you know exactly what the setup's going to be. You see all the beats laid out before you. There isn't really a plot. There's no story to this. What you have instead of a plot, and I mentioned this, you have like a Blake Snyder Save the Cat beat sheet, which is you have these moments that are going to happen, and you just drop them in these particular timed points in the movie, wherever that scene happens to be and whatever set piece you want there. And then they came up with a bunch of different set pieces they wanted in the movie, came up with this dumb plot device where Sherlock Gnomes is being led by these clue cards that he believes are left by his nemesis Moriarty. And the game is I have to go save all these gnomes before he smashes them. So that just kind of connects all the set pieces together. The beats feel very out of place because they're not drawn from any kind of meaningful story conflict. There isn't really a strong story conflict. You reveal the actual story conflict about 2/3 of the way through the movie, though you knew it at the beginning because of this. And that's kind of how it goes. It doesn't really have much of a story. And as a result, there's no emotional impact to any of the little beats. They just feel like things kind of crammed into wild and zany different kinds of set pieces. They did cram that musical number in there, which is one of the worst I've ever seen in an animated movie, which is saying something. And it's the only one, which makes it somehow worse. When you only have one musical number, forcing that into the plot is way more annoying than if you'd had 4, 5, or 6, like in a typical animated movie. And each of the leaps between those big set pieces that they wanted to have, they're just completely unsupported and giant. If you look at it and be like, oh, this looks like the gate to this building I know of, let's just go there, right? And that's how it works. There's no real detective story, just an illusion of one because of it. It ends up just being a scavenger hunt like Die Hard with a Vengeance. In fact, the plot's pretty much a ripoff of Die Hard with a Vengeance. You have to solve my silly riddles or else bad things happen. And if you can deal with the sort of schizophrenic pace of the plot of what's there of the different set pieces, you kind of realize that there's just nothing there. Nothing's really connected. And the only things that end up really sticking out to you are the bad parts. The fact that there's parts where like gnomes were glued to the floor in one part of the scene and then they're just freed. Somebody takes an action and they wouldn't realize that help is about to show up to solve the problem of their action. So there's characters that leap off of buildings to their death only to be saved by someone that they knew was there that they wouldn't have known was there. Things happen without any kind of rhyme or reason. There's things like phones and technology that are conjured up for gags that don't really pan out or for reasons that the viewer doesn't really understand. It's just an endless series of these sorts of things. Overall plot, 3 out of 10, pretty bad. General effects, so that makes the entire story, what did I write? 3 out of 10. General effect, 2 out of 10. This movie is worse than the sum of its parts. Because it's kind of nonstop garbage and every single thing seems to not flow together well, it worsens the effect of each of those individual things. That musical number might be better if you just saw it on its own, but the fact that it's crammed in the middle of a plot makes it that much more annoying to have it show up. The schizophrenic soundtrack, if it were to be on a streaming station, it'd be okay maybe, but because it's laid on top of things that don't fit the action of the action and the music don't go together, it makes the music worse and it makes the action worse. So the combination of elements is truly, truly bad. It's I know it's a kids movie, but it's probably, I've seen good kids movies. This is not one of them. This is probably one of the worst movies I can imagine showing to a kid. It's nothing but empty stimulation with no substance behind it, no kind of meaning, no punch of a story. You can have a movie that has a good story and is still appropriate for kids, which leads me to wonder, they had Romeo and Juliet, and obviously Romeo and Juliet have survived their first movie. But if you're going to base a movie on Romeo and Juliet where the protagonist commits suicide at the end, I don't know if that's an appropriate place to draw a story for children. That seems like something more appropriate for older people who can deal with the themes of madness and love from Romeo and Juliet. But anyway, just made me think about that. Like, these things are not very good for kids, so I don't know what the heck they were thinking with it. This movie's packed with jokes. Like, they're nonstop jokes. None of them land. And the reason they don't land is because you've seen them all before, or they're just completely not funny. It's clearly just a bad attempt at a joke. They're like, we need some slapstick. We'll just have someone hit someone there. We'll have a gnome wearing some kind of weird bikini thing because that might be funny. It doesn't end up really being funny. And so any jokes that almost land, any jokes that might be funny on their own, you don't end up laughing at them because they're surrounded by so much garbage and so much cringy action and cringy dialogue that any kind of good element that's in there just gets buried in the garbage, and the movie just comes out worse for it. It comes out as a worse product than the sum of its parts. And that's really what, really all I can really say about it. It's significantly worse than the sum of its parts. I mean, if you wanted a movie that's worse than like the recent Star Wars movies, this is definitely it. There's plenty of movies that are worse than like Last Jedi, but they're worse on every level. Like, they're technically worse as well as having a bad story. And that's this case. So overall score, 2.88 out of 10. Don't watch this movie. But if you do watch this movie, keep those things in mind. I don't recommend this for kids really either. But I don't know. I can imagine 90 minutes of your time being spent a multitude of ways, which would be more fulfilling and more enjoyable than watching Sherlock Gnomes. I certainly didn't enjoy watching it. Yes, I know it's a kid's movie, but it's a bad attempt at a kid's movie for all those reasons that I talked about. Sherlock Holmes and Romeo and Juliet, these are not like kid-friendly, certainly not 21st century they're either unfamiliar or they are just not appropriate for kids. So you guys have a good one. I'll see you guys next time. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what you want to see in the future. The Star Wars stuff is coming down the pipe. I just have to do a little bit more prep for that kind of stuff because it's a little, it's a little more serious. Likewise, you can find me at davidvstewart.com, dvspress.com, facebook.com/David Van Dyke Stewart, gab.ai/David V Stewart, twitter.com/David V Stewart, email me stu@davidvstewart.com, davidvstewart.com/list if you want to get on the email list, or find me on Patreon, patreon.com/David V Stewart, of course, and I'll see you guys next time.